With No Way Home literally only a few days away from release, what better time to talk about the Spider-Man movies than now? I've gone into detail in the past of how I feel about each individual film and what my thoughts are on the upcoming movie, but there's certain aspects of the original films, particularly the first two, that I'd like to address. And that's the romance between Peter and MJ, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. A lot has been said about this couple, mostly negative, some indifferent, and very few that I can tell that are positive, especially in comparison to the Peter and Gwen dynamic and Peter and MJ in the MCU. I could go on and on about what the criticisms are, what the consensus is, and how I've heard in the past sometimes that it's a little too cutesy, it's very vapid and shallow, the chemistry is non-existent, and that the romance is very much on the level of Anakin and Padme from the prequels or Edward and Bella in Twilight. I'll try not to come off as dismissive. Any of you guys feel that way, that's perfectly fine. But in all honesty, I've always liked the romance. Mostly in the first movie. We'll talk about how it goes in the sequel and maybe in the following one in another video. But the Peter and MJ romance, I think, is really underappreciated and doesn't really get enough credit as I think it should. But the thing with Peter Parker, we all know how the first movie goes. He's a down-on-his-luck nerd, bullied, not that many friends other than Harry, but has a very nice and stable home life with his aunt and uncle in Queens. Mary Jane, on the other hand, is the it girl. Dates the cool guys like Flash Thompson, the school jock, or the bad boy, yet she comes from a very dysfunctional family, with a father who's an abusive alcoholic. Peter and MJ are very different in so many ways. They both feel very misunderstood and are not able to be themselves around other people. After the school fight scene, Peter and MJ have their first conversation in the backyard by the fence. At that moment, not constricted by the social norms of their class, they have a moment where they can just let their guard down and be themselves. Peter shares with her what he's going to do after high school, going to college, working as a photographer, moving into Manhattan. But then when it's her turn, she hesitates, but then eventually opens up to her by saying,
I want to act on stage.
That little moment where she hesitates to tell him, it gives us as the audience the impression that she doesn't really feel comfortable showing that side of herself to other people, and that maybe she has in the past and she's been ridiculed for it, or she's afraid of being judged because she knows that her friends might go, oh my god, no way, that's so dumb. But to her surprise and delight, Peter doesn't judge her, and he actually encourages her to follow that dream. MJ has noticed him before in the past, but this is the first time that she actually gets to see what he's like as a person and get a first glimpse of someone that is a complete 180 to all the people that she knows, particularly all the men in her life. And as the film goes on, they have other conversations and encounters with each other as Peter becomes Spider-Man, trying to find a job after high school. She lies to him initially, saying that she just got offered a job as an actress, but then is forced to deal with the harsh truth that she's just working as a waitress in a diner. Peter could have easily ridiculed her and laughed at her, but he doesn't. And Peter showing genuine interest in how she and Harry are doing in their relationship makes her even more charmed by him, because as far as we know, she hasn't really had that many people show that much care about her. And his indirect confession of his feelings towards her makes her realize that she does want to be with somebody like Peter. He's the complete opposite of all the guys that she's ever known. Her father, Flash Thompson, and then Harry. The great thing about MJ monologue is one of the most genuine moments that I've ever witnessed in any movie. And we as the audience are able to fully understand why Peter's in love with her in the first place. Also, Danny Elfman's music in that scene elevates it even higher. Most importantly, the filmmakers don't rush the romance and make them a couple instantaneously after flirting with each other a few times. They actually talk to each other. They have conversations with each other. For me, that's a perfectly realistic portrayal of a developing romance. I can tell you for a fact, the last two attempts that I've had, trying to form a serious, deep, committed relationship, each woman that I was with, we didn't instantly get together after flirting with each other a few times. A certain period of time went by of getting to know each other and talking, being there for each other in our own ways, helped us develop the romantic connection that we eventually ended up having. And it makes it all more realistic when MJ talks to Peter at the graveyard scene. When she thought she was gonna die, there was only one person that she was thinking about.
All makes me feel like I'm more than I ever thought I could be. That I'm just me.
Fast forward to 2 years later in the events of Spider-Man 2, the romance is slightly problematic for me in one specific way. The fact that MJ is really, really harsh on Peter. Understandably, yes, because not only did he turn her love offer down, he promised that he would be there for her as her friend. And as we can see in this movie, his double life keeps getting in the way, therefore, he has a hard time keeping that promise. I don't necessarily blame her for being mad at him and wanting to move on with somebody else. Still, I do agree that it is a little too harsh, and the empty seat line, I do wish that we had more scenes with her and John Jameson, giving us more insight in regards to her side of the predicament. But I do like in the one scene that they have together when she kisses him upside down, clearly they do not have the same kind of bond that MJ has with Peter. And it's after she finds out Peter's secret that she decides to follow her heart, knowing what the risks are going to be. As for Peter, I think it's perfectly fine for him to plead with her for a second chance, because when he's told that everybody has a choice, and after he loses his powers, he decides that he wants to have a life of his own. Not just in regards to Mary Jane, but other things outside of her. He wants to do well in life. It's all part of the character journey and arc that he experiences in Spider-Man 2, where initially he decides, you know what, what's the point? I want what I want, including me. Everybody's had that moment. It could easily come off as him being selfish, but with Alvin Sargent's writing and Sam Raimi's direction, it's all done in a way where you root for Peter to be happy in the long run, regardless of which direction he goes in. His pleading for another chance, I think, is a good reason for him thinking that it could work. MJ was no longer in danger. He finally feels that he doesn't have to protect her, and that he can finally have a life with her. And ultimately, the only way for them to truly be happy is for Peter to be open and honest with her that he's Spider-Man, and that he does love her. But he doesn't want to put her at risk, and doesn't expect her to make that choice to be with him. So in a heroic sacrifice of sorts, he lets her go, letting her decide to be with John. But now that she knows his secret, she can no longer deny her true feelings and decides to be with Peter in the long run. Even the final shot of MJ looking on as Peter swings away in the Spider-Man costume with a look of uncertainty lets us know as the audience that she took a huge risk in deciding to be with him, and this is not going to be easy. Even back when I saw it at 14 years old, I thought, ooh, did she make the right decision? And one last thing. I've heard people talk about over the years that they think that Peter got his powers back because Octavius kidnapped MJ. Actually, he doesn't. If you watch the scene closely, when he tells her that he doesn't love her, she doesn't believe him, she leans in to kiss him, his spider sense goes off, he jumps at her, saves her from the car, and then she gets kidnapped. He already got his powers back before Doc Ock came into the picture. People tend to be critical about what they're seeing, instead of actually thinking about what they're seeing. And Danny Elfman's score, once again, adds a whole lot more of emotional weight to this romance, particularly when Peter turns around and sees MJ standing in the doorway. People tend to think that Peter and Michelle in the MCU is better, or that the Peter and Gwen dynamic is the best one of the three. I don't want to get too deep into that right now, but personally, I think so far that this is the best romance that all of the Spider-Man movies have had to offer. And if you're judging this romance because of how it turned out in Spider-Man 3, that's not really a fair argument in my book. Regardless of how it turned out in the long run, the way it sets them up in the first movie in particular, I think is just absolutely wonderfully done. And in a way reminds me of the Superman and Lois Lane romance in the original Superman film from the 70s. Charming, endearing, and wholesome. Those are my general thoughts on the Peter and MJ romance. I realize that this is a very hot-button topic in some ways. I would not be surprised if I got some backlash of some kind. If that's the case, then I can't do anything about it. Regardless, what are your guys' thoughts on the romance? Do you like the romance or not so much? Politely, please. Comment below and tell me what your verdict is, and I will see you guys all in the next video.